Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today I have Jessica Buchanan on. Jessica, thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. Welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks so much for having me.
So I have dove into your story knowing that we had this interview coming up, and it is probably the most remarkable story I've ever heard of you beating all the odds, you being captured by Somali pirates and
Mm.
surviving that and going on to do so many incredible things in the world. So maybe we could just start at the beginning and you can talk about kind of how this all unfolded.
Yeah, sure. Well, the first question people always ask me is how in the world did you end up in a place like Somalia, which is fair. I grew up in the Midwest. I always joke around that I grew up in the middle of a cornfield, and I actually really did. And I went to university to study education, and so got a teaching degree. At some point in my university studies, I felt this pull to go teach abroad. Young, naive, possibly some white savior complex going on there because I didn't know any better. And I did end up doing a lot of volunteer work while I was still in college, and then got a student teaching position at an international school in Nairobi, Kenya. Um, and that was great. I finished up my degree. They offered me a job. I took it to teach fourth grade. And then about a month and a half into my contract, I met this cute Swedish guy one night at a club, and we've been talking for like 18 years now. And he was the equivalent of a human rights lawyer, and he was based in Nairobi, but working all over East Africa. And we got married about a year and a half later, and his organization, his contract ended, so he started working for another NGO, and they were moving him up to Hargeisa, Somaliland, which is in the northern part of Somalia. And so we didn't want to have a long distance marriage, so I quit my teaching job and moved up there with him. A lot of people did that at the time, and I just figured I'm a teacher. Teachers always land on their feet. There's always work to do. I wasn't too worried about it. And that's what happened. Eventually, I ended up working for the Ministry of Education, United Nations, and then landed this job at an international NGO, Danish NGO, the Danish Demining Group, teaching, uh, preparing educational materials and programming for armed violence reduction and community safety. And I traveled all over East Africa, South Sudan, Northern Uganda, Kenya, Somalia, Somaliland, and everything was great. I worked for them for about 2.5 years until it wasn't, until October 25th, 2011. So I'm coming up on the anniversary here at the time of this recording. I had been called upon by my organization to go to Galkayo, Somalia, which is a little bit north of Mogadishu, which is what probably most people are familiar with when they think of Somalia. They see that on the news because that's the capital and that's where all the stuff happens. And I didn't feel good about the trip. I just had this really clear, distinct gut feeling that something was off.
Really?
Yeah, and I'd actually canceled the training twice because of security incidents. And the general rule of thumb was we worked in the communities, we were not a target. There was a lot of clan conflict that was happening in that region at the time. So, we were there to help, to serve, to implement programming. So we weren't usually worried about being the target. But I didn't feel good about it. And my colleague, my counterpart that I was going down there to do the training with, basically said, if you don't want to come down here and do your job, we'll find somebody else who will. Um, and I knew he was right. Like there were plenty of people who wanted my job. I know it's not everybody's dream to go work in Somalia as an education advisor, but
I know
there
I'm
are
thinking,
a lot of
really? There
people.
are a lot of
Oh
people
yeah.
lined up?
Yeah, these jobs are really like at the time, I haven't worked in the aid industry, if you will, in a very long time, but yeah, they're hard to get.
Now,
And
that gut feeling, like, was it really nagging at you? Just because we talk about like intuition and
Mhm.
gut feelings a lot,
Yeah.
and I'm just curious, like, was it
Yeah.
something that really kept you up at night?
Well, it did. Yeah. Especially like I'll get to that, but I just felt like a sense of dread and
Mm,
trepidation. But sometimes I think it's hard to like decide if something is your intuition or intrusive thoughts.
sure.
And I was just really used to deferring to other people at that point in my life, about everything.
Yeah.
Whether it was, even my husband or my boss or my boss's boss. I grew up in the church. Like it was very, I grew up very like in a very conservative environment, and so that was just how I had been conditioned.
Hmm.
Like even God, right? Like even defer your
Yeah.
own like thinking and autonomy to this higher power that is telling you what to do, essentially.
Hmm.
Um, and so I decided what's the worst that can happen, right? So I got on a UN plane, get down there. The training's 3 days. First 2 days are fine. We don't have to leave the compound. We do the training like on site, which is fine. I was worried about leaving the compound, and because I knew from trainings that I had taken that you were most vulnerable when you were in transit. And so that's what I was really worried about. And the third day of training, we were going to have to go across the Green Line into the southern part of the city and train a separate staff. And all night long, the night before um, we were leaving the compound to go do this training, I had nightmares. And I am not like a prolific dreamer. To this day, I still like once in a blue moon will remember my dreams, but these, I still remember them. They were so clear.
Wow.
And I had nightmares all night long that the walls of our compound had been scaled by pirates and they were coming to get us. Like I woke up around 5 in the morning, just drenched in sweat, in the middle of a dream that somebody was rattling my door, trying to get in, like trying to get into my bedroom. And I remember getting up out of bed, going into the bathroom, looking myself in the mirror and just saying out loud, Jess, do you want to do this?
Gosh, it's
And
like a premonition.
it was a premonition for sure. It was my intuition going haywire because it knew.
Yeah.
Now, the interesting thing about this, well, we all know that I decided to ignore my intuition, and I write about that a lot. I write a lot about intuition and how ignoring it can kill us, essentially, But like, I didn't remember that I'd had that dream until maybe 65 days into captivity.
Really?
Yeah, I had suppressed that memory until, and I can get to that a little bit later, until I remembered it and within the course of captivity. And that was a real defining moment in my journey, but I'll backtrack a little bit. So, we do the training, everything's fine. We get ready to leave around mid-afternoon. And I'm thinking, okay, I'm like, we're almost home free. We're in the final stretch. I just need to get back to the guest house. My flight scheduled for tomorrow morning. And then as we're driving through the city of Galkayo to go back across the Green Line, our car is surrounded and taken over, and we're driven out into the desert for hours until we're forced out of the vehicle and forced to participate in a mock execution. And then that subsequently began my life as a hostage that would then last for 93 days.
Oh my gosh. And 93 days in those circumstances is like an eternity. I mean,
It
what,
was long enough, that's for sure.
yeah. I can't even imagine like what was going through your mind. I mean, did you lose hope completely at that point, or did you still feel like, okay, I'm gonna be rescued? Did you have any sense whatsoever in that regard? Or were you just
Never
hopeless?
thought I was going to be rescued. Like that was never like a possibility. Like that didn't even occur to me. I didn't even know that happened. My bets were on paying the ransom, and they started the ransom demand at $45 million. So I knew that my company had, and I don't like to talk about this very openly, but they had measures in place, and that's all I will say. But I knew that it wasn't necessarily going to have to be my family who was going to have to come up with the ransom demand because I wasn't freelancing. I was employed by an organization that was funded by several, you know, governments. So I was their responsibility, and it was their responsibility to get me out because they had sent me down there. But um, as far as losing hope, no, I didn't. I knew that hope was like the only thing I had. And at the end of the day, I think I learned, as like cliche as this sounds, that like hope really is your most valuable commodity. And no one can take that away from you. Like that cannot be bartered, that cannot be traded, that cannot be sold, that cannot be stolen from you because you are in complete control of that. And I've, you know, I've taken what, it's been about 12 years now to really mine the meaning, if you will, from this whole ordeal because I needed to make it mean something. But I learned so much about myself while I was out there. Um, so I wouldn't say it was worth it. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I definitely have like squeezed every last drop of meaning that I could so that I don't have to repeat that lesson again about ignoring my intuition.
Yeah. Wow. So what was it like? I mean, how do you feel when you're talking about it now, especially coming on the anniversary? Can you openly talk about what it was like in captivity and conditions, or is it kind of like post-traumatic stress? I mean, I can imagine like it's got to be with you still.
Yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of energy. I'll say
Mhm,
that. And part of what I do now is speak professionally. So
mhm,
I, you know, just got home yesterday from an event, I'm like a military fundraiser. So those are always near and dear to my heart. But those are particularly exhausting because I have to really like go back and revisit that whole experience. And it takes me like days to recover. Now, it's not like I'm, you know, losing sleep from nightmares. Every once in a while, I'll still have one. It just takes so much energy. So I have to make sure that I factor in enough rest and
yeah.
rehabilitation before and after, and not, I'm like a high achieving, like kind of type A person. And
Mhm.
so um it's hard for me to like admit, I guess, that I need to rest, but it's so much better for my mental and emotional health after I've like told this story, you know, again. And I'm sure there's like a level, I'm sure a therapist would say like I've compartmentalized um to get through the story. But there are times when, yeah, it's still really hard to, I can't get through it without crying. Still, and it's I don't, I can't even count the number of times I've told it. It will always be, it will always be a part of me and who I am. I will carry it forever. It's not as heavy, obviously, as it used to be. And now I kind of, you know, I carry it around as a badge of honor, but those scars are scars.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I'm just curious because you had mentioned, you grew up in the church,
Mhm.
and did this ordeal like change your view on things, strengthen your faith? Did you lose some faith? I know you said you strengthened your intuition over the years even
Mhm.
more. Like, what has it done in that perspective? Like, more, I guess, more spiritually, has it
Mhm.
had, I'm sure it's had an impact, but what impact has it had on you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, a profound impact. I mean, when I was out there, like I think the way I was able to hang on to my hope was through prayer. And it's interesting, you know, like when you are, however you want to define that, for me, that was rock bottom. You know, I've never been so scared in my entire life for so long. And you go back to the things that you learned as a child, and for me that was very much about prayer and about communicating with God. And my mom had passed away the year before, and her spirit was very, very, like very present with me throughout the entire captivity. Like I mean, to the point where I could almost physically feel her in some
Wow.
moments. And so I would say that it changed my faith. And I just have this like unbreakable trust in God and the universe. It doesn't look like the faith that I grew up in, but it is so. Yeah, I mean, I woke up my son got in bed with me at like 4 a.m. this morning, and you know, now I couldn't go back to sleep, and but I was just like laying there and just overcome with emotion at with gratitude at where my life is now, and the fact that I'm here and that my son is healthy and strong, my family, we're all healthy, and the things that I get to do, and I'm just, and and I think this is on the heels. Maybe my PTSD looks a little different now because I was at a military event, and got to hear some different perspectives of my rescue, which we'll talk about in a minute. But um so humbled at the reality of what it took to get me here, and just sometimes it still just leaves me speechless. And I hear motivational speakers say no one's coming to save you. And and I get it, like, you gotta do the hard work yourself, but to me, I'm like, they are going to someone is out there and there is help. They will come and save you, and it may not look like 30 Navy SEALs. It may look like a reconciliation or a conversation or a freelance job or whatever, but I have this unbreakable belief because I have proof. My whole life is living proof that when you call out from the depths of your soul for help, help will always come in and save the day. It always, always will.
Oh my gosh, I have goosebumps. I mean, it is. It's like you're so supported. Even if you can't maybe see or understand that support, it is there. And I think it's important. Maybe you can touch on how you were rescued so people
Mhm.
can kind of understand. I mean, it was pretty incredible
Mhm.
um, what took place to get you out of there.
Yeah. So unbeknownst to me, the FBI was leading the investigation and had taken charge of the negotiations essentially. And there are a couple of oh, I don't know, like realities, I guess you could say, that would have to take place in order for there to be to necessitate a military intervention, because that go ahead goes all the way up the chain of command to the president of the United States. And so at the time that was President Barack Obama, and word had gotten back to them through a proof of life call. It was my last proof of life call on January 16th, 2012, that I had a kidney infection. And my doctor, one of the doctors in Nairobi, told my husband, she's got 2 weeks, she'll have sepsis and she'll die out there. I knew that I only had a couple of weeks too, because the infection was spreading. And I was living in the dirt. Like, I wasn't taken to a house, or we weren't like put in a hut or anything. We sat under trees or laid under bushes all day, and then we slept out in the open at night. So for 93 days, I was in the elements, like, just sitting on the ground. And so the sanitary conditions, I mean, I was just like going out in the desert, and of course then contracted a UTI that went untreated, and then it turned into a kidney infection. So that set the wheels in motion. President Obama gave the approval, and on January 25th, 2012, in the middle of the night, yeah, about 2 dozen Navy SEALs jumped out of helicopters and hiked into the middle of the desert, and took out the 9 pirates that were on the ground that night, and rescued me and my colleague Paul, who had also been taken successfully. Um, that is like such an incredible feat. The fact that there was no loss of life on the American side, well, and Paul, he's Danish, but um, and that the hostages lived through the ordeal. It's it's just like unlikely. It is very, very risky. And it's just a miracle that we all made it out alive. And so that if like somebody would go back and look up like the State of the Union address for January 25th, 2012, President Obama goes in to, I don't know where he gives, I guess the Capitol or wherever they do the State of the Union.
Mhm.
And he, the Secretary of Defense, Leon Panetta at the time is standing there and he says to him, "Good job tonight, Leon, good job tonight." And everybody was speculating on what that meant, but they had just gotten word that we had been successfully rescued. And so after he gave the State of the Union address, he then called my father on his cell phone to let him know that I had been rescued and I was coming home.
Wow, how incredible. And at
Yeah,
that point, this was what, 3 months into
93 days.
captivity?
Yep. Yep.
Oh my gosh, so incredible. Well, I can see why you're very tied to the military and everything. I mean, the
Yeah.
fact that like they were able to rescue you and like you said, no loss of life, like how incredible. It's
Yeah.
like you have to believe you're supported by like so much
100%.
more,
Yeah.
at that point.
Yeah. Ooh, that just gave me chills.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So it was you and your colleague. Was that
Mhm.
it for the hostages? It was just the two
Mhm.
of you out there
Yep.
just fending for yourselves, basically hoping that you will get through this.
Yeah, I mean, we weren't necessarily fending for ourselves in like the most, basic sense. We were given a little bit of food, a little bit of water. We were able to talk sometimes. A lot of times they kept us separate. A lot of times, they just played mind games a lot. So they would take one of us and put us in the car and then drive us out into the desert, fire rounds of ammunition, and come back and tell the other one that we'd been shot. And then, so then you wouldn't see each other for days and you didn't know if the other one, if you're out there alone. Like, I mean, it was just constant
Cruelty,
games. Yeah.
absolute
Just cruelty.
torture.
Just cruelty. Yeah.
Oh, wow. So what was it like being did you even realize you were being rescued? Did you think you were being
No, I
kidnapped
thought,
again? Like I
yes,
can imagine that would
exactly.
be scary too, right? In the
Yeah.
middle of the
Yeah.
night?
Yeah. I thought I was being kidnapped by terrorists because that was always a threat. Al-Shabaab is Islamic extremists that have, at that time they had a lot of control over Mogadishu and we weren't that far away. And that was always the threat that they were going to sell us to Al-Shabaab if they didn't get their money. And if that was the case, then I knew I was dead. So and I was so sick, I just thought I don't have the strength to try to like learn another group.
Mhm.
So it was the shock of my life when I heard an American man's voice who also knew my name and say, "Jessica, we're the American military. We are safe now. We're going to take you home."
Wow.
Yeah.
Goosebumps again. The whole time I'm just filled with goosebumps. It's just like I said, the most remarkable story that I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
And so you had mentioned in the beginning that you learned so much about yourself through that experience. And you've gone on to do a lot of incredible work. You've also become a best-selling author. Um, how did this sort of change your path or help you like step into your purpose? Was there
Mhm.
some big I mean, I know there were big things that came out of it, but what exactly happened to kind of change your life moving forward?
Yeah. Ooh, well, it just took a lot of time. I got pregnant right after the rescue with my son, so that
Really?
was
Oh,
definitely
wow.
another shock. I just did not know what to do with that. So that was something. So here I am with a baby, and we relocated to the U.S. a year after he was born. And then starting my life all over again, like having to rebuild. My husband's not from the US, so like it was just all of this. And we decided in the middle of that to go ahead and write a book so that we had an account of what happened for our son. And so we could say thank you to all of the people who had been involved in getting me home because we knew there was no humanly possible way we would ever be able to say thank you to everybody. And um never occurred to me that it would be as successful as it was. Like, never crossed my mind. I'm not even sure I knew what the New York Times bestseller list was that time, you know. I was just like doing my thing. But that did really open up this whole world of like, oh wow, okay, I didn't know this existed. I'm a teacher. And so I was invited to come and speak and share my story. And that was, you know, that was great for a while, and then it wasn't, and I took a break because I just couldn't be the girl that was kidnapped, you know, at that point, and I had another child, and I was deep into mothering and trying to like figure out who I was again. I went back to teaching for a while, and that was really fun. But then I just it became very clear that like I wasn't the same person that I had been before all of this had happened because it just fundamentally changed my DNA. And so the things that I used to do and the things that I used to like identify as and be no longer served me. And I didn't feel like I could serve in that capacity anymore either. And service is very important to me. Community is very important to me. And I think I was largely led by just this feeling of loneliness. And so I started a second book and I took it to, I had a 2 book deal with my publisher, but they didn't like it. And so they released me from my contract. And actually, I was elated because by then I had already had this idea of starting my own publishing imprint for women. Because what happened, especially during the pandemic, like probably everybody and their sister started writing a book during the pandemic. And people started reaching out to me, like, how did you do this? Like, how did you get started in this? Could you help me with this? And thought, oh, there's like a real need here. This is interesting. Um, and so I happened upon this idea of um creating an anthology. And so that really was what sparked Soul Speak Press, which is my imprint, my publishing imprint. And it's been 2.5 years, and we've published like over 100 authors. We have 15 books on the docket for next year. My mind is blown every single day with how this thing has taken off, and we're just getting started. So, you know, it's again, like somebody asked me not too long ago, well, given where you're at now and all the things you're doing, was it worth it? And I'm like, no, no, it was not worth it. Everything it put my family through, everything it put me through, what it put the SEALs who jumped out of that helicopter, what it put their families through, none of this was worth it. But I was like compulsively committed to making it mean something. I could not let it be a waste. And so that is what drives me every day, is to teach again, still in a different capacity, but to help, you know, women who have a story to tell, who've learned to trust their intuition, who've reclaimed their voices in some way, to help them tell their story to a wider audience. And it's the great love of my life, and I'm just really really grateful.
Oh, that's so incredible. And I'm assuming all those books right behind you are
Yep.
part of
I know.
your
We're gonna have so many books next year. I'm gonna have to get a bigger shelf.
That's so incredible though. And as hard as it can be telling the story, I mean, it's so inspirational because it's like overcoming something like that. It's just like for someone like me to hear that, it's like, well, I could overcome anything. Like if you could overcome that, like I can overcome anything. And um going on to do the work that you're doing now, and it's just impacting so many lives. It's like I feel like that gives a lot of people hope as well, just
Mm,
hearing that story and knowing, even in the darkest of times, like there is light on the other side,
yeah,
and to never give up hope
yeah,
and to trust your intuition. Like that
yes.
is, um that is so crazy to me that you had that premonition. I just
Mhm.
can't get over that because I talk about it all the time, and it's like in that kind of a circumstance, how could you ever deny it? It's
Mhm.
there, it's keeping you
Yeah,
safe. And so I'm assuming that's part of your work as well to
for sure. Yeah.
enforce that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I had a conversation with a client yesterday, and we're working on her book, and she had this really interesting like perspective on life. And if I can distill it down, it was basically like life is just there's no graduation, she said. You know, there's no like destination. It's all about learning how to hone those tools and how to listen to yourself and to just get like faster and better at doing those things throughout your life, because you're all constantly going to be reapplying those tools, and
Yeah.
that's the whole point, right? And so yeah, like that's really what I hope through this, it doesn't matter what your like vehicle is. Ours just happens to be publishing and storytelling, but it's to help women really feel confident and empowered. And I think, the stories that we deal with are hard. A lot of them are really, really hard. Um, but there's something so healing about spending the time going back to that
Hmm.
darkness and it reemerging on the page, and then holding that book in your hands as proof that you can survive and also you can thrive. And that's why I talk about this so much. People give me so much crap about talking about this all the time, especially on social media. But I'm like, no, you
Really?
don't understand. Oh, yeah. But you don't understand. Like, people need proof
Oh,
that
yeah.
they're going to be okay.
Hmm.
And I'm nothing special. I am just your average girl who grew up in the middle of a cornfield in Ohio.
Hmm.
And like, yeah, exactly. If I can do it, you can do it. Like we all have the capacity to thrive.
Yeah. I love that. We talk about the subconscious mind a lot on the
Mhm,
podcast, and how, just like you said, it needs proof, it needs evidence. And your
mhm.
story is evidence that you can overcome anything,
Yeah.
anything, even when it seems absolutely impossible, worst case scenario, you can still overcome it. And you're proof of that.
Yeah.
And I can't believe people give you a hard time about that, but I think it's incredible, and I think it's
Mhm.
courageous, and it's serving the world in like such a big way. I'm sure having a ripple effect like far beyond what you can imagine.
I hope
So,
so. So,
maybe you can share with everybody, what are the names of your books, where can they find you, and
sure.
connect with you?
Sure, thanks. Well, I'm on Instagram the most. I still haven't like crossed over to the TikTok world. But Jessica C. Buchanan, or you can connect with us at Soul Speak Press. And then either one of those websites, Soul Speak Press or jessbuchanan.com. Reach out if you have a story you want to share. Books, Impossible Odds is the New York Times bestseller. Deserts to Mountaintops is my own personal anthology brand. So we are working on our third one that comes out in January. Deserts to Mountaintops, The Pilgrimage of Motherhood. So I'm very excited about that. That's going to be a really beautiful contribution. And then all of our books are available on Amazon, or you can go to your independent bookseller, Barnes and Noble, wherever you buy your books.
Jessica, you are such an inspiration. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you back here next time.